Rumors have surfaced that Apple will have one more Intel-based Mac for this year. Which Apple model will be updated with Intel inside? Will the performance be insane? Let's get into it. Tim Cook at WWDC 2020 stated that even with the transition to Apple Silicon, that they will have some new Intel-based Macs in the pipeline. Apple, just 2 months later, released an updated 27-inch iMac with Intel's 10th gen CPUs. People have concluded that since he said some, that there must be at least one model beyond the 27-inch iMac that will be updated. Which model could it be? Let's go through the lineup to see what's possible. Well, the iMac Pro was recently discontinued, so that model is out of consideration. The 24-inch iMac was just updated to Apple Silicon. It's a foregone conclusion that the all-new 14-inch and 16-inch MacBook Pros will have Apple Silicon when they are released. Since the 27-inch iMac was already updated, that leaves only the Mac Pro that could be updated with Intel CPUs. Or does it? When Tim Apple said some, and you go to Apple's webpage for the 27-inch iMac, you see 3 distinct models with i5 and i7 processors, and you can even upgrade to the i9 processor. In fact, if you dig deeper, then you find out that there are actually 2 models represented here, the iMac 20,1 and the iMac 20,2. If I look at that, I could conclude that Apple has already released some new Intel-based iMacs. And that's it. It will be Apple Silicon from here on out. Or is it? Well, Vadim over at MaxTech seems to believe otherwise and suggests that he has revealed the last Intel-based Mac and that it will be insane. I suggest you watch his video to get his rationale. However, I just want to cover the one item that I strongly disagree with, and that has to do with the Intel Xeon CPU. Let me explain why. He suggests that the last Intel-based Mac CPU will be upgraded to the new Ice Lake Xeon CPUs recently announced. To understand this CPU, let's look at it in the context of Intel's Xeon CPU workstation product roadmap, which was recently leaked. This leak shows the existing Mac Pro CPU shown as the Pearly Refresh and is based on Cascade Lake X, which is Intel's 10th gen CPU architecture. It uses the Intel C621 chipset, has up to 28 cores, and uses the LGA 3647 socket up to 205 watts. What replaces it is the Ice Lake CPU, which is effectively Intel's 11th gen architecture that uses the Intel C621A chipset, has up to 38 cores, and is on the LGA 4189 socket, and also introduces PCIe 4.0. However, this one goes up to 270 watts, which means this one would run even hotter. For Apple to implement the new Ice Lake-based CPU, they would need to redesign the motherboard for the new socket, higher power levels, and the new chipset. From an engineering and development perspective, to implement an all-new CPU architecture would consume a significant amount of resources within Apple. So then my question is, why? Why would Apple invest this much time and effort into a new chipset and motherboard? Are Mac customers screaming for this technology? What does it allow them to do that they can't do with the current Mac Pro? Some would say they need to refresh it to keep it competitive. I don't agree since the Mac Pro runs macOS and it has no competition. The 2019 Mac Pro has been out for only a year and a half. They had the trash can Mac Pro on the market for 6 years and the iMac Pro for 3.3 years. They can leave the 2019 Mac Pro with the same CPU architecture for another year and a half before it's replaced with an Apple Silicon version. Also, why would Apple raise the performance bar by implementing the new Intel CPU? Ice Lake provides a 20% improvement in IPC. That would greatly improve single-core performance. Also, the new Intel Ice Lake platform enables an increase in core count from today's 28 cores to 38 cores. Apple is rumored to be working on a 32-core version of Apple Silicon that will eventually make its way into the Mac Pro by 2022. While that 32-core chip will blow away Intel's 10th gen 28-core CPU that you can get in the Mac Pro today, it may not be as impressive if it had to go up against Intel's 38-core CPU. So what is the benefit? I see no reason for Apple to push through that new architecture with new machine learning instructions that they will not use. Apple is clearly focused on implementing Apple Silicon, and rightfully so, and they plan to do so with the Mac Pro by the end of 2022. People purchasing the Mac Pro are not asking if they can get a better Intel-based Mac Pro. They are asking when can they get the Apple Silicon Mac Pro. And just because the new Ice Lake chip is released does not mean Apple won't be able to buy the previous version. Intel won't stop producing the Cascade Lake chips in the Mac Pro today for many years. Apple stopping with Intel on the 10th gen desktop, laptop, and workstation CPUs is the cleanest and most efficient break they could provide for themselves and their customers. I absolutely love Vadim's enthusiasm and speculation on new Apple products. However, updating to Intel's Ice Lake CPU and a refreshed Mac Pro in 2021 just will not provide the return on investment Apple shareholders demand. So then how will Apple update the Mac Pro as Mark Gurman has suggested? They will update the Mac Pro just like they updated the iMac Pro and the previous trash can Mac Pro. In August of 2020, when Apple updated the 27-inch iMac with Intel's 10th gen CPUs and AMD's 5000 series of GPUs, they quietly upgraded the iMac Pro by removing the 8-core CPU from the lineup. Why? Because the new 10-core iMac would embarrass that 8-core in the iMac Pro. Also, in April of 2017, Apple updated the trash can Mac Pro by removing the anemic 4-core CPU and lowly D300 GPU from the lineup. Again, that base configuration would have been completely embarrassed against the new 2017 iMac that was released a few months later. Last year, I spent some time understanding how the 8-core Mac Pro compared to 8 cores in the consumer CPUs from Intel and AMD, and then also compared to the high-end desktop CPUs from both Intel and AMD. What I found was that the 8-core CPU Apple chose as the baseline for the $6,000 Mac Pro was rather weak, losing to all 4 much more affordable CPUs. Apple will update the Intel-based Mac Pro as Mark Gurman has suggested by removing the weak 8-core CPU and having the 12-core CPU become the base configuration. The timing for that change is unknown. It could happen at WWDC, or they could wait until Apple releases its 12-core Apple Silicon chip later this year. To understand why, I suggest you see my previous video on the M1X Performance. They will also replace the base GPU, the Radeon Pro 580X, which is based on the Polaris architecture that debuted in 2016. And they will also add high-end options for the Radeon Pro 6000 series of GPUs. But those are just add-in cards, and they can implement those when stock is available. Due to the cryptocurrency mining craze we find ourselves in today, I'm not going to speculate on timing as to when that will happen. I've been unsuccessful at getting an RX 6000 GPU at MSRP for the last 6 months. It could happen as soon as WWDC or sometime later this year when they can secure enough stock from AMD. Any update to the Intel Mac Pro will be a minimum effort update. Beyond that, I don't expect Apple to invest any more time and effort into Intel-based Macs. Based on my experience with my M1 Mac Mini over the last 5 months, I think Apple is focused on the future, and that future is chock full of Apple Silicon. To check out one of my 8-core build comparisons to the 8-core Mac Pro, click on one of these. Thank you all so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one.